version, then we're going to be on page, let's see, page 71. You happen to have it. If not, it's okay. I'll read it. We'll explain it. We'll talk about it. Okay, let us be. Is everyone on mute? I feel like I hear some residual noise. Okay. We are up to chapter 5, Mishnah number 5. Asara nisim na'asu l'avseinu b'Mitzrayim. There were 10 miracles that were performed for our ancestors in Egypt. Ve'asara al hayam, and 10 on the sea, or at the sea. Eser makos hivakadosh baruch hu al mitzrim b'Mitzrayim. The Almighty performed 10 plagues upon the Egyptians in Egypt. Ve'eser al hayam, and 10 plagues at the sea. So we are continuing this theme of 10 that has accompanied us throughout chapter 5. We had, of course, the 10 utterances. We had at the beginning of the chapter the 10 utterances that God used to create the world. We talked about the 10 generations from Adam to Noah, and from Noah to Abraham, and the 10 tests of Abraham. And now we're on to the next set of 10, and that is the 10 miracles that were done for the Jews in Egypt. Whereas the Egyptians suffered 10 plagues in Egypt, the Jewish people experienced 10 miracles in Egypt. And in addition, 7 days after the Exodus, the Egyptians pursue the Jews, surround them, and then one of the most dramatic events in all of human history, the Almighty split the sea for us. Jewish people walked through the sea. The Egyptians make the ill-fated decision to pursue them into the sea. The water crashes down on the Egyptians, and the Jewish people survive. And at that event, at Splendor of the Sea, that we're told in the Mishnah, the Jewish people experienced 10 miracles, and the Egyptians suffered 10 additional plagues. Now, we know what the 10 miracles and the 10 plagues were in Egypt, because, of course, the Torah spends a lot of time delineating the 10 plagues that the Almighty brought about upon the Egyptians, and that kind of softened Pharaoh's resistance on the Jews, and his heart was hardened. And we know the story. It started with the blood, and then the frogs, and then the lice, etc., until eventually it culminated, it climaxed on the night of the Exodus with the death of the firstborn. At the stroke of midnight, the Almighty killed all the Egyptian firstborn. Pharaoh freaks out, and he sends the Jewish people. He runs after them. Leave whatever, take everything, go, otherwise we're all going to die. And the Jewish people leave that day. So we know what the 10 miracles and the 10 plagues were in Egypt. What were the 10 miracles / plagues that happened at the sea? So, of course, the Torah doesn't tell us. It's not spelled out, so to speak, over 2 parashios like what happened in Egypt. So every commentary on the Mishnah has his own list. And I have a theory about this. If you look at the Passover Haggadah, so there's a section in the Haggadah that talks about what happens. So there's a section in the Haggadah that talks about what happened at the splitting of the sea. According to one opinion, there were 10 plagues in Egypt, and then there were 50 plagues at the sea. And then according to the second opinion, there were 40 plagues in Egypt and 200 plagues at the sea. And finally, the third opinion, there were 50 plagues in Egypt and 250 plagues at the sea. And these opinions are offered by Tanoim, by authors of the Mishnah. So it's not a problem if they disagree with the present Mishnah, but it is interesting that the sages of yore, they saw the events in Egypt, and at the Splendor of the Sea in much bigger terms than what Scripture spells out for us. And there's even one opinion that says there were 250 plagues that happened at the splitting of the sea. Now, at the beginning of the Haggadah, it tells the story of the 5 great rabbis that spent Passover together in the city of Bnei Brak. And they were discussing the Exodus the whole night, and they discussed it into the morning, and it was very time to pray, and they were still in the middle of their Passover Seder. They were still in the middle of talking about the Exodus. Well, the question is, what were they talking about so much? What were they occupying their time with? And perhaps the answer is, if there were really 250 discrete, separate, distinct plagues that happened at the splitting of the sea, well, maybe they were delineating that. Maybe they were discussing that on a very advanced level. So it's not so clear what has actually happened, and every commentary has their own list of what happened. And my favorite version of this is found in the Bartanur, one of the commentaries, one of the ancient commentaries on the Mishnah. So he tells us like this. Number one, at the splitting of the sea was the actual tear of the waters. The waters split, and that is miracle number one. Number two is that the water became like a tent above the Jewish people, and they walked in and they were surrounded by water on all sides, even on top of them, and they were able to kind of be cocooned in this little tunnel of water. And number three is that the seabed beneath them, it wasn't muddy, it wasn't a quagmire, it was dry. If it's possible, if everyone could mute themselves until we have questions at the end. Is that possible? Thank you. So that's number three, is that even though it wasn't kind of concreted over, it became dry instantly. Number four is that when the Egyptians, they were walking in the same seabed, it became very muddy, and it became they were mired in mud. And number five, that when the Jewish people walked on the seabed, it became nicely tiled, like with paved stones. It was that secure, the underfoot beneath them. Number six, miracle number six, is that the waters, they hardened. They weren't liquid, they became hard. And number seven, that the sea split into 12 walkable paths, and every tribe walked in their own distinct path. Number eight, the waters were like glass that you could see through it, and they had the pillar of fire illuminating for them, and the light kind of reflected and refracted through the water, and everyone was able to see the direction in front of them, but also they're able to see the accompanying tribes on either side of them. And number nine, that the salt water turned into sweet water and they're able to drink from it. And number 10 is after they drank from the water, the walls hardened again. You can imagine this might have been somewhat of a sweaty experience. You know, you're being pursued and you think you're gonna die, you jump into the water and suddenly it splits and you're running for your life, you get all sweaty and you're thirsty. Well, there's tons of water, but the water's all salty. But no worries, another miracle and the water becomes sweet. This is the list of 10 miracles that's offered by the Bartanura. Now this reminds me of my favorite Jewish joke as to why Jewish families have a custom to eat gefilte fish. Have you heard of that, gefilte fish? Gefilte fish is this concoction where they take different parts of a fish and they grind it up and they add all these other stuff and they make these little like fish logs. Now, someone who doesn't eat any fish, I never in my life ate any gefilte fish, but very often you go to a Shabbat meal and there's lots of gefilte fish. Well, where does this come from? What is the origin story of the gefilte fish? So the story goes, and this might be apocryphal, I don't know if it's actually true, that Jewish people are walking through the sea and there's water on all sides and they're dodging the Egyptians, and it's been only a week after the Exodus, and they're on a high, and they get very sweaty, and they're very thirsty, and they really want to drink some water. So this is, you want water, you're surrounded by water all sides, it's not a problem. So they try the water, and it turns out it's very salty because it's seawater. So they run to Moshe and they say, what do we do? What do we do? Moshe says, I don't know, what are we going to do? Everyone's so thirsty, but all the water is bitter. It's all salty. So suddenly a fish jumps out of the water and goes to Moshe and says, Moshe, I have a deal. I have within me like a little desalination stomach, and I could swallow salt water, and then I could spit out fresh water. And what I'll do is I'll swallow up all the water, and I'll create this like water fountains, shooting out, spitting out all this sweet water, so everyone can have to drink. Moshe says, oh, that's amazing. Yes, done, you're hired. This is on one condition. Well, what's your condition? I'll only do it if every Friday night, every Jewish family takes my kind of fish and eats it for Shabbos. So Moshe says, it's a deal. And then he says to him, okay, go filter fish. Deal. That's the joke. It's a little childish, but I heard that from my science teacher in high school. Whether or not it's true, I don't know. It's apocryphal, shall we say. But here, according to this commentary, there's a different version. It was one of the miracles that the Almighty did. It wasn't done by a fish, but who knows? Okay, so we have this really interesting Mishnah that tells us 10 plagues, 10 miracles that happened both in Egypt, 10 miracles for the Jews, 10 plagues for the Egyptians. Similarly, at the splitting of the sea, there were 10 miracles for the Jews and 10 plagues for the Egyptians. Now, in a recent Parsha podcast, we speculated that there are two different ways to get to faith. There's the Pharaoh version, and then there's the Jewish people's version. And both Pharaoh and the Jews, they started off the story as idolaters, and they ended off the story as people of faith, people who submitted themselves to God, but they took very different paths to get there. And in fact, before Pesach, we spoke on this Jewish Life podcast about the difference between the Exodus narrative as told in Scripture versus the story that we're reading about in the Haggadah. In Scripture, it's a very Pharaoh-centric story where the transformation that the Jewish people are undergoing is almost omitted entirely, really. And it's all about trying to change Pharaoh's opinion, and his heart gets hardened, and eventually he capitulates. And that's the version of the Exodus that we're told in the book of Exodus. And then in the Haggadah, it's a very Jew-centric, so to speak. It's from the perspective of our people, where they are suffering, and they're suffering, and they cry out to God, and he listens to their plight. Now, what is interesting is that we've speculated that what happened in Egypt is the prototype, is the blueprint for all redemption. All redemption is going to follow this format. The blueprint for all redemption is what happened to the Jewish people in Egypt. And consequently, when we get two versions of the same story, that tells us that all redemptions can follow one of two paths. And thus we could say that even though we're going to be redeemed in the future, it's not necessarily going to be in the best version, so to speak, of that history. It could be in a very unfortunate way as well. But today I want to focus on a different angle of this particular question. The Jewish people, they're in Egypt, and they are suffering tremendously as slaves for hundreds of years at the hands of the Egyptians. And they cry out to God, And God says, you know what? I'm going to listen. I'm going to obey and adhere to the agreement that I had with Abraham, and I'm going to redeem them. I'm going to save them from their plight. Fantastic. It's a deal. And the Almighty starts doing miracles, and the miracles, they have a dual effect. They affect the Egyptians. They soften their resistance in the Jewish people way, and they open up the Jewish people's eyes towards matters of faith. Look at this. The Almighty controls everything. He's able to bring up blood. You have one cup of water. The Jewish person drinks it, it's water. The Egyptian drinks it from the same cup, it's blood. Wow, amazing. Look at these frogs. They're targeting specifically the Egyptians. And all these miracles, one after another, targeting specifically the Egyptians. The Jewish people are transformed. And all the learned experience that they've had at the hands of the Egyptians, that all begins to melt away. And they start to coalesce behind Moshe as the nation of God. It seems like the plan is working. And they leave. And now they're a free nation. And they leave, and there's a pillar of fire guiding their way at night, and they're surrounded, they're enveloped by these clouds, these miraculous clouds. Things are great. Things are going swimmingly. Yet the Almighty, the way it's described in Scripture, he inspires Pharaoh to go pursue them. And Pharaoh pursues them again. And the objective of Pharaoh pursuing them again is to have another standoff. The Jewish people are surrounded on both sides by their enemies, and behind them is the water, and the Almighty orchestrates the greatest miracle up to that point in history, the splitting of the sea. Perhaps what this is telling us is that the Jewish people, so long as they are in Egypt, they're physically located in Egypt, it's not possible for them to become the Jewish nation. If you are in an environment that is the same environment that brought you to a very low point, a very low nadir, it is not possible for you in that same environment to have your transformation. You have to leave. You have to leave your comfort zone, leave your environment, leave the environment that brought you to that place, change where you are, change where you live, move someplace else, and then you can have a transformation. The Jewish people were in Egypt. And in Egypt, they started to follow the ways of their Egyptian neighbors. They were influenced by them. They started doing idolatry like their Egyptian neighbors. And unfortunately, they became really close to the point of no return. And now it's time to have a rehabilitation of the Jewish people. They're going to be rehabilitated, and a new nation is going to be born, the Jewish people. People of God, people who are going to go to Sinai, get the Torah, go to Canaan, be led by Moshe and Joshua. That's the plan now. But they still have all these lingering learned behavior and learned perspectives at the hands of the Egyptians. They have to clear house. They have to kind of unlearn. They need to undergo some counseling and therapy to remove all the noxious influence of the Egyptians. And maybe the idea here is, one of the ideas here is that if you want to change your bad habits, you have to leave the environment in which you learned those habits. The Jewish people, they learned a lot in Egypt when they had 10 miracles, and they witnessed their overlords, the Egyptians, suffering 10 plagues. But that was not complete until they had left. And only once they left, and then the Egyptians came for a round two, for a splitting of the sea, a subjugation of Pharaoh 2.0, only outside of the confines of Egypt could their rehabilitation be complete. That's why, when someone, let's say, moves, or someone goes to a new school, or gets a new job, or something like that, whenever you're in a new setting, in a new environment, in a new situation, you have the opportunity to really reinvent yourself. Because once you get into a pattern, it's really hard to kind of do anything drastic. You can only do incremental steps. Jewish people, they leave Egypt, and now what took a long time to learn, so to speak, hundreds of years of learned Egyptian behavior, could be undone like that in one day. And that's maybe one of the powerful lessons of this Mishnah. You had 10 plagues in Egypt. It took a year, and it still wasn't done. You had to leave Egypt, and you had 10 plagues on one day, and that's it forever. We walk away from the Egyptians, never to return. Okay, so this is the Mishnah here, and I'm happy for questions. I just want to let you know that I did have a little technical snafu. Should have spoken to Rod beforehand. So my thing stopped recording for some reason. No big deal. I'll re-record it.
I'll get the audio to you. I can rip.
No, that's fine. I'll re-record it.
Okay.
You know what? Send me the audio.
Doesn't hurt.
I assume maybe it's possible that I didn't empty it out from previous